Authority.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just trying to be timely and efficient. So the Appropriations Subcommittee on the State and Local Transportation will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll for today's attendance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Steele?
Here.
Representative Slaw?
Yes.
Representative Borton?
Yes.
Representative DeSena?
Yes. Here.
Representative Robinson? Representative Morgan?
Here.
Representative Edwards?
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 6 of 7 members. You have a quorum.
Thank you, William. Okay, so today's committee was called to discuss public transportation, and I'm just going to do something a little bit different this time around, is that we're going to do an overview regarding the fiscal portion of what we're going to talk about. So, as I always like to use as my visual, is our lovely flow chart. And we're talking about the CTF, which is the Comprehensive Transportation Fund, which is at the top of our flow chart. And Bill is going to give us an overview of that funding portion before we hear testimony. And so with that, I would like to call William up to testify. Or do you want to do it here, or do you want to go?
Let's do this here. And if you'd like, we could approve the minutes.
Oh, that would be lovely.
Minutes from May 14th.
Representative Borton moves to adopt the minutes of the May 7th meeting. There being no objection, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. Okay, now, Bill, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is not a formal presentation. This is a quick overview, perhaps to provide context to the discussion that you'll be having, the testimony you'll be having. The general subject today is about public transportation, more specifically focused on state's assistance to public transit agencies, and even more specifically, I believe the focus will be on local bus operating assistance, which is one of the line items that you will find in the budget. So members have actually a publication we did back in August of 2023 that describes these programs in great detail, and then an updated memo dated yesterday that kind of brings the discussion up to date. So the short summary is these are public transportation programs as opposed to the road and bridge programs that we talk about in committee. Public transportation programs, the biggest share of public transportation, or the biggest program area, is state assistance to local public transit agencies. And there are approximately 80 public transit agencies. They are all local units of government in some sense. The state of Michigan does not own a public transit agency, and they range from very large urbanized systems like DDOT and SMART in southeast Michigan. Ann Arbor, Lansing has CATA, Grand Rapids, the Rapid, to very fairly small city agencies and some countywide agencies. Gaylord and Grayling each have an agency. So the primary state fund source in support of these programs is the Comprehensive Transportation Fund. And as our chair pointed out, we've got this flow chart that we use in every meeting. So this describes the distribution of the Michigan Transportation Fund, which is the primary collection and distribution fund for state-restricted transportation revenue, from fuel taxes, registration taxes, an earmark of income tax, and part of the marijuana excise tax. So that is credits the MTF, the Michigan Transportation Fund, follows this distribution model, and one of the distribution earmarks is, after several deductions, 10% of the Michigan Transportation Fund is credited to the CTF, the Comprehensive Transportation Fund, which is dedicated for public transportation purposes. The CTF also receives an earmark of auto-related sales tax. So these two revenue sources together add up to about $400 million, a bit more than that now, but roughly $400 million. And the biggest share of that is appropriated in the budget for transit capital that provides capital assistance to local transit agencies, primarily the purchase of buses. There are federal grants, and part of the CTF is used to match federal funds on behalf of these local transit agencies, and local bus operating assistance that provides, as the name implies, operating assistance to these agencies. So that's a very short description. In the short memo, we bring this up to date. On page 2 of the short memo, we show the last 3 years of local bus operating appropriations. In 2023, $201.7 million was appropriated for this program. You'd find that as a line item in the budget. 2024, $261.7 million for the program, and in the current fiscal year, fiscal 2025, $246.7 million. Again, that is a line item, and then that follows a distribution model to these local transit agencies. And we note, I mentioned the Comprehensive Transportation Fund, the CTF, is historically the only source of operating assistance to this in this program. The last couple years, the line item, it's in a separate line item, but as part of the program, it has included federal COVID relief funding. So in 2024, an additional $45 million was appropriated in these federal COVID relief funds to provide operating assistance. That's included in the $261.7 million in the table. And in 2025, $20 million in federal COVID relief funds were included. And so that it's quite likely, it's clear that that's the last year, the current year is the last year that these federal funds will be available for this program. And my last note is that I mentioned that the distribution follows a formula, a model that's established in Act 51, and it's predicated on the ceiling. Urbanized agencies or agencies that serve urban areas can receive up to 50% of their eligible operating expense. Agencies that serve non-urban areas, as defined in Act 51, can receive up to 60% of their eligible operating expense. And those ceilings were hit roughly in 1997 or 98. Since then, the state percentage of eligible operating expense has declined. Even though the appropriation hasn't declined, the state share of each agency's operating expense has tended to fall. And so of the 50% maximum, in 2025, it's estimated that urbanized agencies will receive 29% of their eligible operating expense, and non-urban agencies will receive 34% of their operating expense. And on that note, I think that summarizes.
Good, thank you. That we've made it so confusing, I think. So if I could just quickly summarize, 50% of the CTF goes into operating of bus systems, and this is my question. Okay. Am I close?
Can I start over?
No.
Okay.
No. And that we have big bus systems like CATA, because we see that, and we have 80 local, like NOTA and WOTA type bus operating systems. So that's my question, is it 50% it goes to operating of the CTF?
I understand the confusion. So of the total appropriation from the Comprehensive Transportation Fund, approximately 2/3, about 66%, goes to operating and capital assistance to transit agencies. Mm-hmm. And that's shown, so about 66% of the CTF goes directly to transit programs. Part of it goes for rail programs, rail freight, rail passenger, but about 66% of the CTF appropriations we find in the budget go for transit. And the biggest part of that is for local bus operating. And then that's where we get this 50 and 60% distribution model. So we get the whole appropriation for local bus operating. It follows a model. Some of it goes to urbanized agencies, and some of it goes to non-urbanized agencies, following the model.
So I'm going to ask one question, see if anybody else has any questions before we move along. But the numbers that you have given us today, are they the new numbers from the revenue outcome meeting that was on Friday? Or because it's 410, so are these how up to date are these numbers is my question.
So the numbers I was just describing are in the budget. They're appropriated, and they're not affected at all by updates in revenue numbers
okay.
that we did last Friday.
Okay. We're good. We're moving along. So that was the overview from fiscal. Now I wanted to invite MDOT up here today, and they have a portion of, so let me just read my notes here for a second. Give me a second. Okay, so we are going to hear from Jean Rustman. She's the administrator of the Office of Passenger Transportation within MDOT. So we have the fiscal portion of the money that goes into it. MDOT has a portion, and then we're going to hear from some of the advocates for who utilizes this funding in the state of Michigan. So Jean, whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you, and thanks, Bill. I know it's a very complicated model, and he didn't even get into some of the language in Act 51 that complicates it even more. But I do want to just clarify one thing for you in that distribution of funds. So we do share that pot of money with the Office of Rail. So the CTF is shared between the two offices. It's about a 60-40 split between Office of Passenger Transportation, Office of Rail. Of that 60%, there is no real set amount that goes into any given line item. It's kind of determined year after year based on needs and available revenues. And just one clarification, so within the local bus operating line item within that budget, that 50% group is large urbans. So, which is an interesting term that's used in Act 51 because it defines it differently than what the federal government defines large urban. But it's those that are serving areas, urbanized areas, over 100,000 population. The 60% group is everyone else. So there are urban agencies that serve in urban areas less than 100,000 that go into that 60% group, along with all the rural areas of the state. And some agencies provide both types of service. So some have to give us two operating reports, one that's funded at the up to 50% level and one part of their service that's funded at the up to 60% because it's based on where the service is provided. So I don't know if that made it clearer or more confused, but it's a complicated process and made more complicated, again, by some of the language in Act 51 that refers to floors from 1997 and local share ratios from 1985. So it's complex, but we manage it. So today I really want to just explain to you what our office does and how we impact public transit across the state and some of the impacts of transit, but I'm going to leave it to the other two groups to talk more about that personal level, how it's actually utilized at the local level. So primary functions of our office are to receive and distribute federal funds. That's the biggie. We oversee the subrecipients' expenditure, so they submit operating reports, they submit budgets, we get invoices before we pay out any money for capital. We have to be responsive to federal mandates, so there's a lot of reporting and audit functions that go along with the federal funds that we receive and distribute to the agencies. We also partner with all of our providers and stakeholders, so we keep those good relationships going with all of the public transit agencies, the other state departments that are impacted by public transit, which is a good share of them, by local offices and businesses. We try to reach out and make sure we are understanding the needs that are out there of everyone. And we also have a role, we believe, in the advancement of innovation and new service models. Most of those improve efficiencies, they improve access to transit, There's a lot to be gained by those. And I guess if I could, just one, example is that when you have a rural agency, oftentimes the general manager fills in for the dispatcher and sometimes has to get in the bus and drive it if they have their CDL up to date and their drug testing up to date, right? So they are a jack of all trades. So for them to be able to do all of that, they need help, and technology is really ramped up in the last 10 years to be able to help with computer-aided dispatching and other services that help you do more with less. And trust me, they all do more with less. We also do have a role that we don't talk about a lot, not that we're embarrassed by it, but private bus carriers. There is a state law, Public Act 432, that regulates the safety of privately operated motor coaches. And so we actually have some staff, including heavy-duty mechanics, that grow in the state and have to inspect charter buses, including party buses. It's an interesting thing to do, to make sure that those buses are safe and that they are that they have the proper insurance levels. So again, it's a huge safety issue. We do it for the private motor coaches. The state police does it for school buses, and when those two intertwine, we coordinate with the state police on that task. So we talked a little about the different state programs within our budget. So we do have an unrolled budget, if you will. We have several line items that are included in the annual budgets. Local bus operating is one of the largest ones that has the most money in it. Transit capital, there are mandates also in Act 51 about transit capital that we must provide at least 2/3 of the required local match for federal funds. So we have traditionally been able to, most federal capital grants provide 80% of the funding, and so the other 20% has to be non-federal. And we have provided at least 2/3 of that. Traditionally, we've been able to provide the full 20%. Most local transit agencies don't have the capacity to provide that match along with all the operating that they need to, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that operating mix. Transit or marine passenger is another one that we not only have a line item for capital needs, which is now used solely to match federal funds. There did not used to be federal funds that came to our ferry boat systems and our public passenger ferry boat systems in our state. Now there is, and so that money goes to matching those, so it makes the money go further. The other interesting thing we haven't mentioned is that local bus operating, one of the mandates in Act 51 is that marine passenger systems receive 50% of their eligible expenses. It's not up to, it's at least 50% of their eligible operating expenses. Intercity bus, we do have a program in the state. There is a minimum here, and there's also a federal program that goes with this that is to connect people to the national network. So the federal program is specifically to connect rural areas to the national transportation network. The northern part of our state was abandoned many, many years ago, and we knew that connection needed to be made to make sure people could get where they needed to go. And so we do contract for services in the northern part of our state to ensure that there are at least basic levels of intercity bus service throughout the entire state. The southern part of their state is still lucrative enough that we simply provide some assistance with buses that operate in Michigan. Specialized services and transportation to work are just that. They are special programs that assist people that are seniors or people that have disabilities to get the essential services they need or to get to work. And that transportation to work program pairs with a federal program. The specialized service operating assistance is 100% state, but it pairs with a federal capital program that helps provide capital for some of those agencies as well as others who don't receive specialized service. The rideshare and van pool line item, the Michivan, hopefully some of you have seen Michivans on the road. The Michivan program has been very successful, specifically in getting people to jobs. This is a way for them to partner and match up with people that are going to the same or similar locations for a daily commute or a regular routine commute, and they can use the van pools. We contract that out. A private company enterprise currently operates that service for us, and it's a way to give people reliable trips to and from work, and this uses state funds, but it also uses federal congestion air quality funding to fund these that impact those areas that have air quality issues. The rideshare program is really just our assistance to those local rideshare offices who help formulate and put together more carpools, if you will. So if you just want to find somebody, you have a car you can use, you just want to find people to share that ride, that's what the rideshare offices do. Service Initiatives is the pot of money that we use to do the new technology and innovation projects. It's to help demonstrate the need and the proper best practice way to implement new technology or perhaps new service models. It also helps fund things like regional transportation plans. So if areas are looking at broadening their scope or coordinating with neighboring counties, that helps them fund a study to show them how to do that in an implementation plan. I will not go through this slide. This is just to illustrate to you the number and variety of federal programs that we match and that we administer on behalf of rural transit agencies. Urban transit agencies can apply directly to the federal government for these programs. The rural agencies must flow through MDOT. We have to put together consolidated applications and then administer those funds if and when we receive them. And I want to point out that the very last item on that list, although it's one line, it can represent up to 10 or more discretionary programs, a lot more under IIJA. So I just want to talk about a few of the current special projects that we have going on. A lot of these are funded either by federal grants that we've received or with our service initiative funds. And again, I'll just touch on these, but we've done several mobility challenges. And that is where we say, okay, there is a gap in services and there are potential solutions out there. We want public-private partnerships to be used to show how we can use technology or innovation to fill those gaps. So the first one was the $8 million Michigan Mobility Challenge. We funded, that was all state funds. We funded 13 projects around the state, ranging from fully accessible automated vehicle design to micro-mobility in rural areas to technology that helped people with visual impairments find their way to a bus stop and ensure they were getting on the right bus. And it helped the bus talk to the passenger and vice versa. We've just finished up doing the full review and lessons learned from that, so we can publish all of those learnings not only within the state but nationally. This has gotten a lot of national attention with these challenges. We are in the midst of a mobility wallet challenge and an equitable mobility challenge, all filling gaps for people who otherwise weren't receiving adequate mobility to get to jobs and education, training, grocery stores, doctors. The RUC research project has been one that's caused some confusion, so I wanted to make sure I clarify what our project regarding RUC is, road usage charging. And ours is a research project that was funded through a federal grant from FHWA, and we partnered with Via Transportation to do a study to understand the potential impact of road use charging on transit ridership. If people knew they had to pay per mile when they were driving, would that compel them to instead use public transit? And what would that mean for our need to increase public transit? And it also did, though, take a look in another portion of that study of how feasible is it to collect that type of data, the road usage type of data, from owners of vehicles And that report will be coming out soon. It was very interesting. We did a statewide survey to understand people's perceptions and attitudes towards it, and then throughout the study collected data so we could understand the complexities of getting that data from different types of automobiles. So it was interesting findings, but it was not meant, and it does not recommend any funding levels, anything. It's simply looking at those two factors. Another interesting one, and then I'll kind of skim over the rest, though, we have a SMART grant, again, a federal grant, and that is to help the rural transit agencies publish what is called GTFS Flex data. That is the data that when you pull up the transit app or another app to find out how you can get from point A to point B on transit, they have to have data that they can take in to explain what that transit service is. For a long time, there was no way for rural agencies' services to show up. This GTFS Flex data does allow that. And so we thought it was important for our rural agencies to have that. It's actually also starting to become a requirement for National Transit Database reporting. So we're happy that we can help the rural agencies do that and become more visible to others. As you'll see on there, we do have an economic benefit analysis tool that is just finalizing. We're finalizing getting all the proper data in it and getting the outcomes, so we'll be able to share with you a lot of information on the economic impact of public transit on the state of Michigan, on specific communities. I just was reminded of at a conference I was just at that on the national level, they say that for every dollar invested in public transit, $6 is returned to the economy. But we know that differs based on the types of projects that are out there. So we want to be able to give really accurate Michigan-specific data, and this tool will let us do that. Happy to talk about any of the others, but sake of time, I'm going to keep going. I think we've touched on most of this. So the public transit funding for operations, I think there's enough in that you can read that. If anybody would like me to go over it more, I would be happy to. But this explains some of those nuances in funding public transit. First of all, with the LBO and the differences between the 50% group and 60% group. For ease, I leave off the up to, but it's important to remember those are up to, because as Bill said, the most recent percentages were more like 29 and 34. And that was with the help of one-time ARA funding of $20 million. Without that, we would have had even lower percentages. I do want to note that the rural transit agencies, we also administer 5311 funding, Section 5311 funding, and that provides 18% of their eligible operating assistance. Small urban agencies receive directly some federal funds, and they can determine if they want to use that for capital or operating, and that's a tough decision in many years. And the large urbans cannot use it for operating. They can only use their 5307 funds for capital. So you can see by those numbers that there is a large amount of funding that has to come at the local level. So approximately 48% of our transit agencies, percent of the eligible expenses are not covered by state and federal funds, and those have to be generated locally. That number is even larger for those large urban agencies who can't use their federal funds for operating assistance. And obviously for ferry systems, it's 50%. There are many sources of local funds, and I think the other presenters will talk about this a little bit, but I did want to let you know that 57 of our transit agencies have transit-specific millages. Many of the others have general fund money that is basically set aside for public transit for their agencies. Fare box, service contracts, they do every imaginative thing they can. They sell advertising on their buses. They sell maintenance services to other agencies or entities. They even receive donations and try to enter private partnerships with local benefactors of public transit. If there's one thing I can leave you with is that local funds are a variety of mixes. Sometimes people get hung up on fare box. Fare box is one of several options for local funds, and that's really a local decision on how they want that division to be made. Just going to touch on these funding needs and pain points. You know, we all know there's funding needs and pain points with everything, every budget you look at. As we've showed you, local bus operating reimbursement rates are going down every year. Increased costs that every business has experienced, transit is too. Insurance costs, fuel costs, the cost of the maintenance of vehicles is going up and up the more technologically advanced those vehicles get. Transit vehicle prices have gone up about 50%, if not more. And the availability of them is more sparse, especially considering the Buy America requirements and the lack of manufacturers who've gone out of business. There's very complex procurement requirements at both the state and federal level. As I showed you, there's a lot of different federal programs. They're very complex to apply for and then to administer once you receive. A lot of data management now, cybersecurity issues. Staffing levels are a challenge to get qualified staff at the transit agencies and within state government. And I think I've used up a lot of time, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for your testimony. I do have one question, Rep. Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, you mentioned in your presentation that more people are using transit, senior populations are booming, younger generations are driving less. Do you keep numbers on how many people participate in that?
The ridership numbers?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we do. And we actually publish a report, it's called the 10E21 report, and I'd be happy to get you,
That'd be great.
We distribute it, but I can get you a copy that shows the ridership amongst different services, and then if there's any other questions you have, we do have full reports of ridership
Yeah, I'd
from
like
our
to see
transit
that.
agencies.
And real quick, I wanted to ask you, because there's a lot of stuff in here that you need to pay for, but how much of the budget goes for the actual buses and ferries and the employees who drive them? How much of your budget goes to those specifics?
So in our budget, as far as wages and salaries, that's part of that local bus operating line item, right? So that's around $220 million of what we get. So it's a large share. At a transit agency, I think you're going to hear more information on that from the Public Transit Association. I'd have to look, quite frankly, and I could do a report how much. It's a high percentage of their cost. Up there with insurance. It's both health insurance and vehicle insurance. The cost of buses, for us, our line item for that is around $70 million, and that's just matching federal funds primarily. We do some 100% state capital, but it's very expensive to do both of those things.
If you could just give me specifically afterwards, that'd be great.
Absolutely,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Send over through Bill.
Thank you, Rep. Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I will ask just one question for the sake of time, but I would love for you to talk to us all day long. I think this is very exciting, and I appreciate the Chair for having this as a topic for our agenda here. I think the one big question I have for you is sort of, if you can talk to us about what would it take to develop a sort of more modern, comprehensive, statewide public transit plan. We have sort of a long-term road plan of what projects are in the queue for future things, but I'm curious if we have anything like that when it comes to mass transit, and what would it take to develop something like that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's something we've been talking about not only within our office, but in coordination with the Council on Future Mobility and Electrification, is the need for a statewide transit plan. We do have a statewide strategic plan. It's over 5 years old now, I believe, and quite honestly, I wasn't thrilled with the results from the private contractor that put it together. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think what we would need to do, in my mind, is that there are currently transit plans that urban agencies have put together. We need to consider what are in those plans, because again, it should be locally driven as much as possible. And then we need to look at best practices from across the country. There are some states who have done statewide transit plans. And then it really is doing a broad overview of what is currently out there? How does it interact? And what isn't there? Where are the gaps? There are huge gaps around the state where there is no transit or shared mobility available. And then developing scenarios for what would a good level of public transit look like, what capital would be needed, and what revenue would be needed both at the state and local levels to do that. So definitely something I'm interested in doing, and I think we have kind of a roadmap, and we'll be working in the next year to try and identify funding and identify resources to help put that together.
Thank you. Rep. Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just had a really small question. You highlighted a bunch of different programs that citizens can utilize, but I'm wondering what is the biggest barrier that they often face when using public transportation?
I think the biggest one is the amount of services out there and the hours of those services often don't match up with needs. The transit agencies do the best they can to provide as high level service as possible, but when you're trying to carry people who are working jobs on 3 different shifts, getting people to and from those jobs at all hours of the day is very challenging. I think that in many cases, it's a lack of driver availability to have the level of service that's needed out there as well, and getting drivers who understand how to provide good customer service. They all want to, but it's hard to hire good drivers, and without them, you don't have the level of service needed.
Okay, last question, Rep. Slough. Sorry, we're on a time crunch here.
I know.
So just really just 2 quick questions. One would be, are all the public transit agencies funded? Do they have some sort of millage, local millage, or that kind of thing? So, and I don't maybe even need to answer right now. Maybe you can get it to us.
I could. In the slide deck, you'll see that I mentioned like 57 of them have dedicated transit millage.
Okay.
Many receive general funds from local general fund millages
So it's
or
57.
budgets.
That's my number.
The
Okay.
57, but yeah, and I can possibly break that down a little bit for you, but
Okay, that's good. And then the other, just overall question is, it seems like our fares are fairly inexpensive, and obviously there's a cost per ridership, and I didn't know if there's anything that identifies cost versus revenue out of the per person ridership.
so we can calculate that based on their operating assistance reports, but as I tried to stress in my presentation, the fare box is a local decision really on how they come up with their mix of local funding. They're often serving people who are working at best minimum wage jobs, and so it's a determination of what percentage of a person's income should they have to spend and what percent does the local community want to help them with, right? So, so yes, we can come in. That is all over the boards across all of the agencies. That percent of what fare box covers is very broad.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you were asking how much does each ride cost, or how much are they being charged?
Cost and charged.
Yeah.
Well,
the
so there's no, that's all across the boards. The state doesn't set that at all. That's a local determination of what the fare box is on any given transit
but
agency.
not the fare box, but how much each ride cost.
And again, that depends on the transit agency, how many passengers they carry based on their expenses, and that's often for rural areas. The cost per passenger is much higher because they're spread out over huge amounts of terrain. For urbanized areas, that cost per passenger is lower because of the population density. And again, we can split that out for you in any way you'd like to see, understanding the caveats of the different types of service.
Thanks, Jean. I appreciate your testimony. And just with no further questions at this time, and then we have our next guest coming up here. If we could invite you forward. We will be hearing from John Domes from the Michigan Public Transportation Association. We almost should have done this in 2 meetings. drag it out slow.
We need to go to the. Okay.
Thank you. And whenever you're ready.
Sure. Thank you so much for giving us the time today. My name is Harmony Lloyd. I'm the Vice President of Planning and Innovation at SMART in Metro Detroit. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Michigan Public Transit Association. So I get the more fun task today of going into a little bit about what transit agencies are doing. And I tried to touch on some of the ones that are in your areas so that you can just see some highlights. I, again, could spend all day on this, but just some highlights of the work of what local bus operating really does. What does that mean at a day-to-day level? So covering this, and a lot of it has been covered, but there is some level of public transportation in all 83 counties in Michigan. Some cover the entire county, others it may be just the main city, and the out-county areas are not covered. But even despite lacking a train system or rail system, we do about 125,000 rides every day, so that equals about 47 million trips a year that are being done on public transit. So it does affect a huge number of Michiganders. So when you look at public transit, often people only think of the big bus. There's so much more to us than that. There are the big buses. That's a key part of what we do. There's also the smaller vehicles. I hope maybe you saw us last month when we were here with a variety of the vehicles so that you could see how many ways that we deliver transit, and are always looking at ways to be more effective and to cut costs by using smaller vehicles when it makes sense. Ferries, as Jean touched on, and then fixed guideway, which you know as the Q line in Detroit. So who is contributing? And she covered this too. Federal funding is focused on the capital. So that's really, they're going to help with the buses, not the operating costs. State, which we've talked a lot about, and then the local funding, millages and fares. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how millages work together with local bus operating to help the transit agencies be able to do new things and provide additional service. Who depends on transit? We were originally going to list just kind of all the different use cases of people who use transit, people going to school, people with disabilities, but you can figure that out yourself. I mean, the honest answer is all of us in some way either use it or know somebody who does, or work at a place where people depend on transit to get to your business or your doctor's office. I heard somebody say this the other day, and it stuck in my mind. Anyone who is riding transit is going somewhere to either spend money, to make money, or to learn to earn money. And when I first heard it, I said, I don't know if that's true, but I kept going through all of the different people I know that are using transit, and they really do fall into one of those three buckets. And so we are both literally and figuratively an economic driver. And I think that's important to remember when you talk about the cost per passenger, because those people are going to put money back into the economy one way or the other. And so it definitely has an economic impact in your community when people are able to use transit. So a couple agencies that I just want to highlight. Roscommon, this is an example of an agency in a more rural area. There is no hospital in Roscommon, but seniors make up 35% of the population. And so LBO funds are used for transportation for seniors. They found that there was a huge need that wasn't being met for seniors who were being discharged from the hospitals in counties surrounding Roscommon, but had no way to get home. And so they began doing medical transportation where they would be able to go to any county and pick up residents and bring them back home.
This has been enormously popular. They added 2 more vehicles just to help meet the need for this service, and did over 65,000 rides in 2024, which for a rural county is a significant number, and obviously made a huge difference to many, many people in the county. In Oakland County, you all are aware that in 2022 there was a countywide millage passed, and one of the been a lot of exciting developments with that millage and the money that it then was able to leverage at the state level. But the funding really helped expand service in some of the northern and western areas of Oakland County that previously had not been served or had been served at a minimal level. NODA and WODA, which Representative Steele mentioned earlier, have grown enormously since the millage passed, and I think these numbers are pretty incredible. The increases just in the past year, NODA ridership increased by 155%, WODA 177%, and People's Express 192%. So if you want to talk about pent-up demand, it clearly was there, and the services are being utilized. And I know from talking to the people that live in those areas, they love the service, they're using it, they appreciate it. And WODA and NODA, if they had the resources, could continue to grow and offer even more, and that would have the need. In the Holland-Zeeland area is served by a system called MAX. They did about 240,000 rides in 2024. They recently did a community-wide study to talk to their riders and figure out where those gaps were. Somebody asked about what the challenges were. So Max really worked to understand where the needs were that weren't being met. And what they found was that 51% of their riders were going to work, and that their hours were not working for the early shift workers. So those first shift workers that had to get there early were not able to. And so based on that feedback, Max made some adjustments and expanded its weekday hours to accommodate earlier shift workers. And it's my understanding that's been very successful. So they are still one of the agencies that's struggling with finding drivers, and they're working hard to do that. But they have been able to meet this need. And I wanted to point that out because I want you to know at the transit agency level, we're constantly looking at different ways that we can meet different needs. And we are very willing to make adjustments to our service to make sense that what we're doing is needed and it's fitting the needs best. In Ann Arbor, in May of '24, they opened the Washtenaw Express route. This connected, which was a long time coming, an express route between Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor, and really opened the door for a lot of job opportunities that previously had not been available for transit users. Since the launch, so just roughly a year, they've done 84,000 rides. So again, that really tells you that the demand was there, and just by putting this one route out there, they were able to address it and meet that need. And people are using it, and they're using it to get to work. So going back to that, they're going to make money idea. In Battle Creek and Calhoun, I don't think anybody on here serves that area, but I thought this was so interesting. They did a year-long pilot, one of the grants that was funded by MDOT that you heard Jean mention, to look at what the demand countywide would be for an on-demand type of a service. They ended up providing 33,000 trips, but had 150,000 trips that were requested and weren't able to be provided. So those numbers are incredible and show how much the people in Battle Creek and Calhoun County needed that service and wanted it. And so as a result of that and some other things, they did have a transit authority board who proposed a millage, and that millage passed with nearly 60% of the vote. So, you know, what you've heard and what's true is that the local communities are very willing to put in their fair share, and they're just looking for an additional bit of support to combine with that local share to be able to provide comprehensive services. And finally, SMART, my agency, also was affected by the Oakland County millage, but also just continued growth in Macomb County and Wayne County. We've been able to expand routes in all 3 counties. And some of the stats that I thought were interesting, with the new routes that we've put in, we've provided new access that previously wasn't there, for 118,000 additional residents, and transit now reaches an additional 90,700 jobs. So again, that economic driver, putting people in the bus so that they can then get to work or get to school. We added 310 new bus stops to improve rider safety and experience, really make it easy for all users, but especially people that may have a disability. And we've developed a plan to continue that expansion throughout the entire Metro Detroit area over the next several years. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague to talk about the less fun stuff.
Sure. Thank you. Again, my name is John Delmas. I'm the director of the MPTA. And I want to talk about some of the funding issues and just maybe some solutions as well. So credit to True, Megan's group here, who have this graph, but this is showing basically the state funding share for local transit and its decline over time. So just as you see roads crumbling, we want to illustrate the fact that transit in some cases is being very destabilized. And the budget drop, combined with the increase in local expenses and the increased demand that's wanting that resources and the need out there, has led to this drop. And next year is going to be very difficult for many agencies who are looking at potential cuts. They've also heard that a lot of other people locally that provide transportation, could be seniors, could be education, could be medical, they're all cutting back too, and they're looking to the local transit to step forward. And they say, well, we would love to, but we need to figure out some solutions. So what it looks like is, less service, less hours, maintaining the service at the level that people want. If you have to wait an hour for the bus to come, you're probably going to walk or find some other way to get there. It's just not always viable in those kind of situations. This is the graph of how the money flows through, just one way of representing it. But again, 10% traditionally of all state transportation funding going into the CTF, half of that about going into LBO, and then that making its way into the budgets. We think that full funding of it is about $400 million per year into the CTF, $200 million a year additional into LBO for our current system. We're not talking building monorails or things that would be really maybe neat to have, helpful to have in some cases. It's just making the buses really run in a positive, on-time way. I do want to share that the package that the House put forward did include some through the formula that included, 10% for the CTF. But when you look at the net effects of the sales tax on fuel, it only led to about $50 million net increase for CTF, which is shared so many other ways before it gets to your transit agencies. So I do want to give you credit for putting forward a road funding solution, but it's not quite a transportation funding solution. It didn't do enough anywhere near the amount to help transit meet the needs. And as a history lesson, going back to 1997, the gas tax increase there went to roads and bridges, did not go fully to transit. 2015 income tax, $600 million a year from income tax, goes to roads, does not go to transit. 2018, marijuana taxes went to roads, not to transit. And as you know, 2020, the bonding program went to state roads, not to local roads, none to transit. There is already $1 billion approximately a year that goes straight to roads and bridges without transit share. So to say that let's fix roads and bridges by not including transit, I don't think is actually a genuine solution. Here are some solutions we do want to put forward. Making sure that there is a share about that 10%, I think is a pretty fair, equitable share. Just note that if you're eliminating the sales tax on fuels, that does hit the CTF. There is a bill out there, Morgan's 4210. It's a revenue neutral shift to the CTF that could be potentially very significant, part of the conversation. And then the last thing I would note again, when your voters get a chance to vote on public transit, 90% of local millage questions, including in Battle Creek, 2.66 mills, November general election ballot, 60% supported. So I'll leave it there. If there's questions, thank you to the chair.
I think we're good. So thank you, Harmony and John, for your testimony. I appreciate it. And we're going to take one more and try to end by 1 o'clock. So. Who was it? Megan. So Megan from the Transportation Writers United, welcome. And don't have slides. If you would like to start whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I figured they provided plenty of slides and graphs and numbers. I wanted to take a moment to bring it back to people. My organization, Transportation Riders United, has been working for 25 years because we believe everyone should be able to get where they need to go, regardless of whether they drive. Even in the Motor City, where we love our cars, people need choices for getting around. Just like you wouldn't want a toolbox that only had hammers in it, you need a transportation system that has a wide range of tools available. And that's really what I think the Comprehensive Transportation Fund does, is all of those other things. If the hammer is our roads, they're really, really important. You've got to have them, but you wouldn't necessarily want to use that for every purpose. So I think it's, as was noted, every county across Michigan has transit providers who are providing critical rides to people who don't drive. Every county has seniors who are aging out of being able to safely drive. It's wonderful that people are living so much longer, but they shouldn't necessarily be driving. My stepdad, unfortunately, crashed his car twice in the last year. At 83, we're trying to figure out ways that he can get around so he can still teach euchre lessons and can still tutor his grandkids, but without always having to drive. Every county has Michiganders with disabilities, people who have a ton to contribute, who can work, who can learn, who can shop, but they just can't drive. Like my friend Andrew, who's got epilepsy. 99% of the time, you would never know he was any different. He's brilliant. Just got a degree at U of M. But there were so many job offers he couldn't take because he will never get behind the wheel of a car. Many businesses have workers who need to make sure that that their workers can show up even if their car breaks down. So even if somebody loves their car and drives most of the time, I'm up here with a rental because someone tried to steal my car and it's in the shop. Thankfully, my insurance covers the cost of a rental, but a lot of people can't. I know that the folks at IKEA, when they moved into Canton, were shocked to find out that there were no transit routes and they couldn't get a lot of their hundreds of entry-level workers to their jobs without driving. Many young people want to get to job training at community colleges or elsewhere, but recent studies have shown that that there's an awful lot of community colleges that are not accessible. A gentleman, Michael, I met recently, has had to quit college 3 times in the last 5 years when his car broke down and he couldn't afford to fix it. And suddenly, in the middle of the semester, he's lost out. So, and then even beyond those tens of thousands of individuals who ride transit, we all depend on the people who depend on transit. Whether it's the worker at your kid's daycare, whether it's the chef at your favorite restaurant, whether it's the pharmacy tech who's preparing your prescription, or the nurse at the hospital you might need to take your mom to. We all know that local roads are a major priority, but as John said, local transit should be an important priority too. Local transit agencies have been doing incredible efforts with minimal funding. They've figured out lots and lots of ways to stretch their dollars. And if you think about it, one of the most efficient uses of dollars is having a single vehicle, a single source who's getting people to work, and then getting students to school, and then getting doctors to our seniors to their doctor's appointments, and then taking grandma shopping. All of those are all being done by these transit providers that then make sure that the sandwich generations and us caregivers can get on, don't have to break up our day every single time Auntie's got an appointment or such. So, as John mentioned, at one point in time, the state covered about half of the costs of local bus operating costs, but flat funding over the course of decades has meant that they're now covering less than a third, and And if we want these agencies to be able to serve our seniors, to get people to jobs when their cars break down, we've got to make sure they can depend on those state dollars. So please do whatever you're able to in that state budget to increase the local bus operating and to support the public transit funding.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you. With that, I would like to thank everyone for coming today, and I would like to see that there's no further questions before the committee, and that this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for following up and bringing back to the people.
There you go. You had actually covered many of the things I was going to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Representative. How are you? Pretty good, yes, thank you very much.